For decades, my next guest has been representing the evangelical church in Canada, not only within the nation, but all over the world. I speak fondly of my friend, Brian Stiller, who is with us today to talk about his latest effort called Evangelicals Around the World. My dear friend, God bless you. It's good to see you.
John, nice to be with you today.
Oh, Brian, so good to see you. This is an interesting book. Folks, getting this. This is an encyclopedia of what is happening with the Church of Jesus Christ all over the world.
3.5 years ago, I was rummaging through a bookstore in Florida, and I saw this book, Evangelicals for Idiots. Well, it kind of took me by surprise.
Yeah.
But as I thumbed my way through it, I thought, this is a very good book.
Yeah.
But it was just about the U.S.
Yeah, and just simple 101 stuff.
That's right.
About what was happening in the American church.
But the evangelical community in the U.S., for example, is 25% of the country, which is makes it the largest religious community in the U.S.
Even with the Catholic community in mind.
Catholic community was about 27%, it's down to about 22%.
Okay.
So now it's the largest. In the last 50 years, evangelicals have grown faster than any religious community in the history of the world. Now in Canada, we're about 12%, but it's been a fairly stable 12%. So as I looked at this community, which has become the dominant religious community in the world. So you got three world communities, Christian communities. Roman Catholics, 1.2 billion. The World Council of Churches, which includes your Eastern Orthodox, that's 500 million. The Evangelicals, 600 million. So we're the second largest in the world. Nobody had ever defined us, except everybody tries to define us.
Sure.
So I thought, let's put together a book that will give people a sense of who we are, where we've come from, what our theology is, by regions, what's going on, because Africa is different than the Middle East, is different from Southeast Asia. So we put together 50 writers, and Thomas Nelson, one of the major book publishers, said we'd love to do it, and that's the result.
Okay, so, and congratulations to you and all the team. So let's start with just a simple definition of a global evangelical around the world. Who are we?
An evangelical is one who believes in basically four things, as David Bebbington, the scholar out of England, some years ago defined, and we've all found it to be a very helpful definition. Believe the Bible to be true, Jesus is the only means of salvation, the importance of giving public witness, and the importance of us doing good and believing, pardon me, I left out conversion, which is the second one. So let me go to start again.
That's right.
Jesus is the Christ, the Bible is true, the importance of personal conversion, and the importance of being a public witness and doing good for Christ in the world.
The salt and light elements.
That's right. So those are the four elements that define an evangelical. Now, often a Catholic will say, I'm too an evangelical. And so what you can do in the overall numbers, you'll get people from various Christian communities who also self-define as evangelicals. But in the demographics of the world, we exclude Catholics from being an evangelical because evangelicals have tended to be Protestants, if that makes sense.
Sure it does. What's happening with evangelicals is the gospel has been shared through the years, really coming out of North America and missionaries. What we have seen happen in the past 30 to 40 years is a surge of incredible, phenomenal growth in Latin America, Africa, and Asia.
Yes.
People finding Christ, and now arguably some of the largest churches in the world are not in North America. They are in these other population centers.
And there were two reasons that happened, in my view. One is that the Pentecostal wave that became the charismatic wave. So initially Pentecostal wave, which said that to be filled with the Spirit, you've got to speak in tongues. The charismatic wave said it matters that you're filled with the Spirit. Speaking in tongues is one of the gifts. So it opened the door to an understanding of the Spirit in the broader Christian community. That has given fuel to the fire of evangelism, and that has moved throughout the world. The second has been indigenous leadership. Mission started with white men and women doing the work in these various countries. Now it's the leadership from the countries, from the culture, from the soil that is giving impetus and leadership to what's going on. Those two factors have triggered this massive wave around the world, so that when When China was finally opened, we went back into China and we found that since 1949,
right.
there's been a growth of a church, and some estimates go up to 140 million, and it's all led by nationals and funded by nationals.
All indigenous, that's
Yes.
right. We're talking with Brian Stiller. This is the book. He has been the captain of the ship of this with some others. It's called Evangelicals Around the World. It is available at our e-store. I just want to speak to those of you who are watching right now. You have a pastor, you're involved in a local church. You need to get this for your pastor, for your leadership team in your church. Please go to the e-store and purchase this. We'll send it to you. This is a tremendous reference point. I love the historicity of this. You go back even the 1600s and talk about the seeds of what you have timelines, and you talk about the seeds of what we today think of modern day evangelicalism, where it all began as Bible translation movements and martyrdom that took place. Walk us just a little bit through some of the highlights of that, and then I want to talk a whole lot about the future and what evangelicals are looking forward to in the future.
In the early 1500s, Martin Luther triggered the Protestant Reformation. He didn't call his followers Protestants.
No.
The others called them
that was the label that they were given.
That's right. He called them evangelicals, which comes from the New Testament word evangel, which means the good news. And so right from the very beginning, and you go to Germany today, you have the Catholic Church and the Evangelical Church. So you have that as an initial definer. Then the early 1700s, the revival movements and the Wilberforce movement against slavery, that really brought forward the evangelical theology as compared to the kind of mainline Protestant theology. People say, what's an evangelical? I say an enthused Christian.
And in that era, that was the Wesleys and the Whitfields.
It was.
That were in the UK and then brought over their gospel message to
a little
the
over
US.
100 years ago in North America and Europe, a liberal theology began to take over Protestantism. A liberal theology saying the Bible isn't true, Jesus isn't necessarily the Christ, you don't have to come through Christ to be saved, and so forth. So the social gospel became a definer. The reaction was an evangelical conservative back to the four essentials of the scriptures, and that's what gave impetus and has really defined us today.
So as we look forward now, let's talk about where the global evangelical church is. What are some encouraging signs? Then as we wind down our interview later on, I'd like to talk about what's happening in Canada as someone who has been on that scene, you being on that scene for so many decades and generations. Let's take us around the world. What's encouraging you as you're watching the gospel go forward and people finding Christ?
Well, obviously you have a challenge with Islam in the Middle East and North Africa and Southeast Asia. But even in the midst of that, as you work your way through Africa, you see the explosion of the church generation after generation. So you've got Africa by itself has a younger generation compared to the demographics of North America. And you have the explosion of the church through conversion, through social engagement, through political leadership, through the issues of poverty and the economy. You have evangelicals engaging there. Latin America, it's just everywhere you go, these huge churches, movements of all kinds, and then in Southeast Asia. So you have a coming to Christ, a belief in the work of Christ, but also in the power of Christ to bring transformation to the physical well-being and to the spiritual well-being. So when I was in Nepal, and I reported a few weeks ago, you have an engagement with the demonic. And so in some places, the demonic is at the forefront of the battle of faith, and it's there that an evangelical faith is able to engage with the darkness and bring about solutions to individuals' lives. So globally, you have this rise of the gospel that doesn't seem to be obvious in our world here in North America.
You and I both traveled around the world. My prior job, I did a lot of global travel. In your present role with the World Evangelical Alliance, you're traveling a lot globally. You've got to be encouraged, as I have been encouraged, as to what is happening and seeing the church mature and grow and seeing these emerging leaders come on the stage.
Oh, it's stunning.
Shocking if you're not aware of it until you go there.
I was in northeast Iraq a few weeks ago with 200 young people. For a conference. You've never seen such faith and enthusiasm and good-looking young people who love Christ.
Were you in Erbil?
Erbil.
Yeah.
And the dynamic of faith is just, so you say, am I in Iraq?
Yeah, I know.
Yes, I am.
Oh, I know. It's amazing. It really is. Let's come home to Canada for a moment and talk about your home and native land. what's happening? We tend to think, oh my, we're getting statistics of less Bible relevance in the culture and all that. But where there is this diminishing on one half, you and I are looking out on this Canadian landscape, and we're seeing again an emerging of engagement and leaders who are rolling up their sleeves perhaps like never before.
Well, demographically in Canada, you have the Catholic Church that has lost her presence and moral authority since the 1960s, primarily out of Quebec, but it's moved across the country. The mainline church, especially the United Church, has dropped, her numbers have dropped radically since the late 60s. So when you look at the overall demographics, you say there is a diminishing of Christian faith in the country. That is true. We have found within the evangelical community, the 12% continues to be fairly resilient.
Yeah.
But what I find, which isn't statistically verified, but anecdotally I find, I have never seen such prayer movements, Bible study movements, and social engagement movements dealing with issues of injustice and poverty among the evangelical community as I've seen in Canada in the last 10 years. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I don't know at what point that will show itself statistically, but we do know that historically in North America, that when you have a statistical downward movement of numbers, inevitably you have an upward movement. The revival notion is a part of the Christian message, and I believe it's something that we can anticipate and pray for in Canada.
We've never had as many churches, as many large and influential churches that are partnering, doing satellites. There's never been as much partnership as there's been. And I would say with the risk of tooting our own horn here for 100 Huntley Street, we've never had as large audiences as we do now. We've never had these large of audiences throughout our years. And there is just a real interest in what we are saying and doing here. So I'm with you on that. And it's encouraging because I think we had some of your colleagues on recently too, just bringing great stories as to what God's doing through his people all across the country.
Yeah, it's amazing when you walk into those places. For example, we've never had so many Bible-believing federal politicians as we have today.
Yeah.
Now there may be a mixed story there, but I'm encouraged by the notion that Christians believe that engagement in the world, be it political enterprise, education, health, media, science, whatever, that the engagement of the Christian in the public square is part of the Christian message. And for me, I lived through years when that wasn't considered to be part of our calling at all. But now I see this, and I'm so encouraged by that engagement, so that salt and light as a living reality in the Christian witness is everywhere around us.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you're getting to see it, because it's true. In the 1960s and 70s, when you were rolling up your sleeves and getting started, it was a very different terrain. And you, along with a wonderful group of people that you helped form through the years, those seeds have created so much that we are today. So let me just take a personal word and say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a statesman for the faith all these years, decades across the country. We love and respect you, and you have always been a friend to this program and the founder of this ministry, David Maines. We love you, respect you, and we hope that this book is widely read. And I think it is just a marvelous, marvelous tool, representative of what you believe these past 50 years of the journey. But it's also just a great tool for you to get to your church leaders. I'm very serious about this. Would you please go online and buy several, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these to our online e-store, and give this to your staff, your pastors, to people. Give it to them so that they can be encouraged. It is a tremendous tool and reference point. And for young pastors especially, the need to kind of know what our roots are, to understand historically where we've come from. And as well in here, it tells you where we're going. Brian Stiller is our guest. Always welcome here, Brian. We love you. Thank you very much for everything you continue to do. Will you come see me again soon?
John, I'm delighted to see the revitalization of this ministry, the penetration of its outreach across the country, and the continuing combination of sophistication and gentle heart gospel merging together to give to our country a continuing witness of Jesus, his coming, the importance of our personal conversion, the witness of Christ as salt and light, and that testimony that goes day after day after day. Thank you for doing that. and thank you for coming back to Canada. I was so annoyed when you left, and I'm glad you're back.
It's time to go. Brian Stiller is our guest, and I hope we'll be many, many more times in the future. Thanks so much for getting this book and sharing with your church's leadership. You won't regret it.